Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program from Washington. On today's show, Peter Kornbluh's new book, Back Channel to Cuba, and the secret relations between the U.S. and Cuba for the past 50 years. Peter Kornbluh, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Peter, I want to talk about your new book, Back Channel to Cuba, that you co-authored with
William Leogrand and I wrote this book together over a 10-year period.
And in that book, Henry Kissinger, I just want to quote one of the things that you reflect in your book, says, "I think sooner or later we're going to crack the Cubans." Tell us a little bit how he reached that point.
Well, we all know that Henry Kissinger had an imperial arrogance when it came to smaller countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Chile. In the case of Cuba, when Fidel Castro did something that Kissinger really didn't like, he went into the Oval Office and said to the President of the United States, "I think we have to smash Fidel Castro, but we might have to wait until after the 1976 elections." Another day he went in, "I think we're going to have to clobber the Cubans, humiliate that pipsqueak." He referred to Fidel Castro as a pipsqueak, a little person. But the problem for Kissinger was that Cuba, a small island nation, was acting as a major power, projecting its military forces far away in the continent of Africa, supporting the anti-colonial party in Angola against CIA-backed rebels and South African-backed rebels who were much more politically to the right. Kissinger was supporting the efforts to overthrow Agustin Nieto and the MPLA, and Fidel Castro was supporting Nieto and the MPLA with military troops. And so Kissinger's grand scheme, his chessboard of superpower influence in Africa, were being challenged by this pipsqueak, Fidel Castro.
And how did you know all that, with that precision?
Well, my office, the National Security Archive, sounds like it works for the CIA or is part of the CIA, but actually we work on getting secret documents declassified.
So this is official?
This is Kissinger's official documents. I obtained the declassification of the contingency plans that he ordered to strike Cuba, to attack Cuba militarily if Cuban forces expanded beyond the borders of Angola in Africa. He went and asked Gerald Ford if he could
There was a president
at
that time.
Gerald Ford was president in the spring of 1976. He said, "I think we're going to have to smash Castro, get him out of Africa." The president said, "I agree." And so Kissinger convened a secret group called the Washington Special Actions Group.
Including Donald Rumsfeld?
Yes, Donald Rumsfeld was then Secretary of Defense way back then for the first time. There were other huge names, Vernon Walters, who had been Deputy Director of the CIA, who was Deputy Director of the CIA at the time. And they basically said to them, "We need plans, including military plans, to either attack Cuba, to have a naval blockade, to mine Cuban harbors, punitive damages. We have to smash and humiliate them." He said to the general, "I need military plans that go all the way. We don't get credit for, half-assed measures," basically, is what Kissinger said. There's more to the story, though, Jorge. This is at the end of a top-secret 18-month effort that Kissinger himself initiated to normalize relations with Cuba, precisely to keep Fidel Castro from doing this kind of thing that was inimical to U.S. interests abroad.
So they were talking to each other?
They had been talking to each other, and actually at the very moment that these contingency plans were drawn up, they were still talking to each other secretly. And Kissinger actually wrote a handwritten note to Fidel Castro and sent it with a secret emissary in the summer of 1974. And the note basically said, "Look, the world is changing, détente is possible, we have things to talk about, we should find a discreet way to talk. I'm willing to name secret emissaries, are you?" And Castro gave the emissary a box of cigars for Kissinger and a note. Probably Cohiba Lanceros. Castro liked to practice cigar diplomacy. Castro sent these cigars back with a handwritten note that said, "Sure, I'm willing to talk. Here are the two emissaries that I'm going to name." And then a series of meetings, secret meetings, took place. They took place in hotel rooms, in swanky hotel rooms in New York City, in airport lounges at LaGuardia and National Airport. They took place in the private homes of high U.S. officials such as Larry Eagleburger, and here and there on the streets. These meetings culminated in a 3-hour discussion in a hotel room at the Pierre Hotel, a 5-star hotel in New York City on Central Park, in which the agenda was actually how do we normalize relations between our two countries. And we've obtained the declassification of the actual memoranda of conversation of that 3-hour meeting, and that is now available and is used in the book as well. This attempt to normalize relations obviously failed.
Because of?
Well, it failed because Cuba was not as interested in normalizing relations with the United States as it was in supporting allies in the third world, such as NATO and Africa.
Because they have their own foreign policy.
They had their own foreign policy. Fidel Castro was becoming a significant leader of the third world movement and of the non-aligned movement at that time, and he saw his responsibilities differently. Our book goes through a number of such episodes in which sometimes Cuba was more interested in better relations and sometimes the United States was more interested in better relations. Now we've arrived at a point where hopefully both countries are equally interested in better relations and they can move forward.
But at that point, Henry Kissinger gets furious at the moment that Fidel Castro decided that he is the owner of his own foreign policy.
Exactly.
And is not necessarily at the mercy of the U.S. interests in the region, in Africa.
Yes. Henry Kissinger had a rather imperial attitude and arrogance towards smaller countries and leaders like Fidel Castro. He didn't see them as being worthy of being independent actors on the world stage. Only the United States and the Soviet Union and perhaps China could be such actors on the world stage and control world events and influence world events. And Kissinger was particularly angry because he had extended an olive branch to Fidel Castro. And what does he get in return? The pipsqueak sends his troops off to Africa to undermine CIA-supported forces and to fight CIA-supported forces and make the United States look like they're on the side of the apartheid regime of South Africa.
You mentioned that Kissinger was thinking that was extremely important what will be the presence of Cubans in Africa.
Frank Morris simply told the New York Times that Kissinger was completely overreacting, and it was as if the Cubans had invaded the entire continent of Africa rather than a small country like Angola. And of course, the Cuban troops were on the side of the government in Angola, not the rebel forces. So basically, the comment is, this is Henry Kissinger completely overreacting. But I think more important, if you read the documents that we obtained the declassification of, you see that even Kissinger's top advisors who were writing these contingency plans warned him, if you attack Cuba, you are bringing in the Soviet Union. You are basically risking a superpower confrontation. And Americans will be killed, and the war could broaden, and we better have plans for a broader general war, meaning World War III. Kissinger was entertaining violating the agreement that John F. Kennedy had made with Nikita Khrushchev to end the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which was an agreement that the Soviets would withdraw the missiles and the United States would never invade Cuba. Kissinger was now entertaining not an invasion per se, but an attack. He was warned that this was not 1962, that the Soviets would be unlikely to retreat, and that a third world war, a superpower conflagration in the nuclear era, was possible with any type of strike on Cuba. So there was a dangerous moment, but it came and went. The history of dialogue and efforts to try and find common ground with Cuba continued. In fact, Jimmy Carter was elected over Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter almost immediately initiated an effort to normalize relations with Cuba as well. We have in our book the top secret directive that President Carter signed in which he said, I want to normalize relations with Cuba, and I'm authorizing my staff to conduct the secret diplomacy step by step to arrive
So reversing
at that
the
goal.
situation.
He reversed the situation that was at the end of the Kissinger-Ford-Nixon era and started again to try and talk secretly with the Cubans about better relations.
What do you think that is the situation in the Congress behind you regarding regarding the interests or not of certain sectors of the congressmen to reestablish relations with
One
Cuba?
of the stories that's in the book is how Bill Clinton came to give away the presidential power to lift the economic embargo on Cuba in 1996. And so it is Congress, it is up to the Senate and the House to actually vote to actually lift the entire embargo. We will not be able to completely normalize relations, get rid of the embargo without a vote in Congress, because Bill Clinton, after Cuba shot down 2 little planes that had repeatedly overflown Cuban airspace and violated Cuban security, Bill Clinton signed away his presidential power over the embargo. Up until 1996, the embargo, which was first put into place by John F. Kennedy, was a presidential discretion. It was a presidential exercise of power. The president could implement the embargo, but he could also lift the embargo himself with just a flip of the pen. But now it's going to take Congress. Obama can poke holes, significant holes, in both the travel regulations and the trade regulations. He can take Cuba off the list of state-sponsored terrorism that the State Department maintains and ease the economic sanctions against Cuba. He can trade the Cuban spies that are here in jail in the United States, the famous Cuban 5. There are actually 3 now, so it's the Cuban 3. For Alan Gross, who's a USAID contractor who was caught in Cuba trying to set up surreptitious networks for satellite communications that eventually dissidents could use to communicate with the United States. And so he can do a series of things. The president can do a series of things without Congress, but to arrive at that ultimate point where relations are completely normal will take a vote right down the field here.
We're just a few weeks away from a midterm election,
Right.
where the Democrats risk losing the Senate. In that case, the 2 houses will be in the hands of Republicans. And that means that the possibilities of normalizing relations are getting farther away?
I don't think so. And in fact, there might be a small silver lining if the Republicans take the Senate, which is that then Robert Menendez, who's a Democrat, but a Cuban-American Democrat who's virulently anti-Castro Cuban and has held U.S. policy towards Cuba hostage as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. If the Republicans win, he will be replaced by a Republican, and perhaps a more moderate Republican. A number of Republicans up there in the Senate and in the House see the advantages of trade with Cuba, because they come from districts that grow rice, that grow soybeans, that have ports that would be expanded if we had normal economic and commercial relations with Cuba. There's a lot of business interests in the United States that are losing out to the Spanish hotel corporations and to the Swedish cruise line industry and to the Chinese investors. There are countries drilling for oil in Cuba, and Exxon would like to be there, and Shell would like to be there. I mean, they would like, the U.S. companies would like to be there. So they are lobbying Republicans as well, but they can't get past Robert Menendez. So if Menendez is gone, we might have a slightly different situation. As I say, it's up to Obama to do what he can while he can do it. He's running out of time. He does have an extraordinary window of opportunity, Jorge, and that is that the Panamanians have now invited Raul Castro to attend the next Summit of the Americas.
In Panama.
In Panama. And the United States, of course, is invited. The United States has blocked Cuba from attending all the previous Summit of the Americas since the early 1990s. But now there's a possibility that a president of the United States and a president of Cuba will actually sit across a conference room table in a multilateral regional meeting for the very first time since the Cuban Revolution. And if Obama is smart, he will use these months in between the meeting to lay the groundwork through back-channel diplomacy, the type that's
like that.
written about an entire 55-year history in this book. And he will lay the groundwork for some kind of agreement that he can have with Raul Castro. You may remember that when Barack Obama was a candidate,
2007.
In the primaries, he said to Hillary Clinton during a CNN debate, I would sit down with the leaders of hostile states and try and talk out our differences. I would even sit down with Raul Castro. He said this on television. And now he's going to have the opportunity to sit down with Raul Castro. And what he needs to do is conduct the diplomacy behind the scenes that will lead to agreements on all these issues. Alan Gross and the Cuban Three, Cuba on the state-sponsored terrorism list, travel of Americans to Cuba, not just Cuban Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully U.S.-Cuban relations can move forward towards what Barack Obama himself has called for, a new beginning, a new day in U.S.-Cuban policy.
How long it took you to write this book?
I've been working on this issue of secret diplomacy with Cuba for 20 years. I wrote the first chapter of the book that was published in 1994 in the New York Review of Books on Kissinger and his secret diplomacy with Cuba. That was 20 years ago. I've been working with William Leogrand for 10 full years to actually pull all the documents together and write the book. So the book is meticulously done, very detailed, full of colorful stories of secret intermediaries such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, bringing messages from Fidel Castro to Bill Clinton, the chairman of Coca-Cola, J. Paul Austin, being a courier of messages from Jimmy Carter to Fidel Castro, Jimmy Carter himself as an ex-president being enlisted by the Cubans to help solve the migration crisis of the summer of 1994, secret diplomacy with the Clinton White House. I mean, there are all these wonderful stories that add up to an amazing history and add up to a history of communications with Cuba. So it's not as if we can't communicate with Cuba, it's just time to do so openly and normally.
Any pressures where you were writing the book, or any anecdote that's something that was unexpected in terms of elements or foreign messages to your idea?
I mean, there were no threats or warnings or political impediments. I pushed the U.S. government to declassify as many documents as they would and could. I obtained those Kissinger contingency plans, which have never been published before this week. We obtained many other documents, though, including all sorts of memoranda of conversation between Cuban officials and U.S. officials. We found out that a Cuban official met right here with an FBI agent right on the stairs of the Lincoln Memorial behind you, Jorge, to talk about counterterrorism collaboration between Cuba and the United States. Cuba, of course, has always wanted the U.S. government to stop the terrorism of Cuban exiles who were trained by the CIA in the early 1960s and kept attacking Cuba in the 1970s, people like Luis Posada Carriles.
Who is still living in Miami
still
freely.
freely living in Miami, despite the fact that he is probably one of the most substantive international terrorists of his day. Calls himself a freedom fighter, but I guess he defines it as blowing planes out of the sky. And so in the 1990s, actually, Posada Carriles was behind a series of bombings in Cuban hotels and discotheques in Havana, and the Cubans wanted to collaborate on counterterrorism measures, and the U.S. government was willing to do so, but one of the secret meetings took place sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and a number of other secret meetings took place. And at one point, Fidel enlisted Gabriel Garcia Marquez to carry a memo about a plot that Cuban intelligence had uncovered to blow up yet another plane. And that led to the FBI going to Cuba and some form of counterterrorism collaboration.
What was the reaction of the Cuban government to your book?
I'm taking the book to Cuba in just a few days. I'll see what the reaction is then. Of course, I think they were impressed and serious about learning of these contingency plans and being able to read them. They're 40 years old, but they're still significant to Cuba. But I think even more, I think the Cubans are interested in exploring better relations with the United States, and the fact that the history shows, and this book shows, that Fidel Castro has seriously reached out to every new president since Kennedy to explore the possibility of better relations. That is a surprise, that is a revelation, and that is something that I think the Cubans would like the world to know. They haven't been hostile without restraint. They've never taken the position that normal relations are not possible. To the contrary, the declassified documents and the messages, the memos we obtained show that Fidel Castro made an extra effort to reach out to every new president, even the most hard-line anti-communist of them all, Richard Nixon in 1969, Ronald Reagan in 1981, and
didn't succeed.
And didn't succeed. Didn't succeed, but at least got talks going on a variety of issues that were important.
It's going to be translated to Spanish?
Absolutely. The book has already been translated, and we are now looking for a Spanish publishing house in Spain and Mexico, Argentina. We would like the book to be available in Spanish to all Spanish readers, and certainly to Cubans who read Spanish as well.
What will be the most surprising thing that you will always remember regarding the part of your life writing this book?
Well, I had the privilege of interviewing both Fidel Castro and former President Jimmy Carter for doing the book. I also interviewed pretty much all the surviving actors of the secret diplomacy that went on over almost 50 years. Some of people were no longer available, but many of them were. And what I found most important was that there was an interest on both sides. There were reasons why initiatives didn't succeed, but then again, some initiatives did on specific issues such as migration, counterterrorism. The Elian Gonzalez case was a famous effort to solve a problem that was very dangerous and get a little boy back to his father. That back-channel diplomacy certainly helped with that. So what I feel is so important is that there's a foundation of diplomacy and dialogue in the history of U.S.-Cuban relations, which has been largely defined by aggression. The CIA assassination plots against Fidel Castro, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs invasion. There's another side to the history over the last 55 years, and that is an attempt again and again and again by two sides to talk to one another. And I believe that in this day and age, right now, the stars are aligned for the two sides to talk, sit down, Obama, Raul, and come to an agreement in which the history becomes history and the future becomes a future of common ground.
Isn't that ironical that someone like Henry Kissinger, who was, and your reporting also shows with higher facts, that he was absolutely involved in the assassination or in the coup d'etat of Augusto Pinochet in Chile, that he is suggesting to crush Cuba because he was upset. This character has been the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Well, if he had actually been able to normalize relations with Cuba, I would have said that he probably deserved a Nobel Peace Prize. There was a lot of controversy when he got it. There still is not peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis for what he got the prize for. You know, Henry Kissinger's legacy, I think, with these declassified documents is always going to be somebody who spat upon human rights, supported dictators like Augusto Pinochet, and arrogantly kind of wanted to use U.S. power, notwithstanding the loss of human life, by attacking small countries like Cuba. He didn't get that chance because Jimmy Carter won the elections, and that's good. I think the history of his efforts to normalize relations with Castro are really interesting given the harsh perception of him. But I do think that the book tells a great story, not only about him, but about the exercise of U.S. power towards Cuba overall. But it still offers the potential for a real opening, and that's how I hope our book will be received. President Carter, the ex-president, gave us a comment on the back of the book in which he suggested that it could be used for improving U.S.-Cuban relations, and that's what I hope the book will be used for.
So hope is still alive.
Hope is still alive. The book starts with a quote from Raul Castro in which he says to visiting U.S. senators, you know, our relations are like a bridge in wartime. I won't say who blew up the bridge, but I think you did it. But now it's up to us to rebuild each of our sides of the bridge. And if we rebuild together, we will arrive in the middle and we can shake hands without winners and losers. And that, I think, is the message of this book. With dialogue, we can build that bridge, rebuild that bridge, arrive in the middle. There will be no winners and losers. The history will become the history, and hopefully the future will be more positive.
Peter Kornbluh, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jorge. It's always a pleasure.